Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Lion update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football, from the NFL preseason to college football kicking off this weekend. BetOnline is every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. You think you know your stuff? Well, get in on the winner-takes-all $300,000 NFL Survivor pool for the upcoming season. Now, when the games are over, head to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to betonline.ag today and use the promo code BELIEVE, that's B-L-E-A-V, to get in on the action. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is proud to partner with Illumination Brewing for another season of crafting State IPA, the perfect tailgate and game day beer for Penn State football fans. State IPA is available now at your local beer distributor, grocery store, plus select bars and restaurants. Visit illuminationbrewing.com/beer/state-IPA to learn more. Must be 21 years or older to purchase. Please drink responsibly. Also, State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today and keep an eye out for State of State gear coming to Blue White Outfitters soon. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State. I'm Tom Hannafin. Penn State wrapped up training camp earlier on this week, and the preparation for the West Virginia game is already underway. 1 week from today at noon, as a part of Big Noon Kickoff on Fox, number 8 Penn State visits the West Virginia Mountaineers to begin the season of Nittany Lion football. We all have been dying for this to be back. College football is back as of today, so figured this was a great opportunity to give a primer to Penn State football fans. We get the week 0 slate, which is a little light. The game in Ireland, at least you got it, but still really looking forward to Penn State getting back underway. Going to take a moment to reflect on some of the comments made earlier on this week by Penn State head coach James Franklin and offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki as training camp closed and the prep for West Virginia got underway officially. Like, comment, subscribe, rate us, and turn on notifications. Hit us up in the comment section on YouTube. Get at us on social media at State of State Pod. And if you're not already, become a member of our YouTube channel, and you can get all upcoming episodes of State of State ad-free for just 99 cents a month, just in time for the 2024 Penn State football season. Now, we have all clearly been dying for football to be back, and the chatter surrounding this game has already escalated in a variety of different ways. We mentioned earlier on this week the comments by West Virginia defensive back Garnett Hollis Jr., who used to play for Northwestern, a transfer, talking about how Penn State tends to disrespect their opponents that are not Ohio State and Michigan. You got the likes of Pat McAfee doing a show in Morgantown, West Virginia, the night before Penn State versus West Virginia. There's a lot of people nationally calling for an upset potentially, that this West Virginia team has a lot of ability. We're going to do a full game preview this coming Wednesday, Justin and I, to get ready for Penn State versus West Virginia. But this is the time of the year where the work has been done, and now it's a chance for Penn State to regroup a little bit, take this weekend to take the foot off the gas a little bit. James said this past week that this Saturday is a chance for some of the players to have some other meetings, but then also be able to watch the slate of college football and then get back to business on Monday and really, really prepare for this thing. And he said earlier on this week, he talked about the progress made in camp, and he said, quote, "There comes a point where you just need to play somebody. It's hard to really determine who you are. You see good things on tape. You see concern areas you need to work on, but you're going against the same people every single day. It's hard to really judge until you play somebody else." Franklin said, "I'm comfortable with where we're at. I think there's some areas we've taken some significant steps in. I think it's much more competitive between the offense and the defense. I think all three coordinators have done a phenomenal job, as well as some of the new players. I wouldn't say that there's an area that's overly concerning. Obviously, that's great to hear from your head coach. Obviously, your head coach is going to put out a positive message. You'd be pretty surprised if he went out there and it's like, well, we sunk it up in camp. So you completely understand that. There had been that question asked of James Franklin earlier on in training camp of which side of the ball looked better. And he said there was just inconsistency in that there would be certain periods within practice and training camp where the offense would be dominant and the defense would falter, and then the inverse would happen. So to hear that that's been more consistent and that you have both sides of the ball almost matching each other and you have less of that imbalance is a really good sign at this point in the year. That's something that you do have to get worked out in camp. And the point that James Franklin made earlier on in training camp is you cannot, in gameplay in the regular season, have, for instance, whole quarters or halves where one side of the ball is absent. There were a lot of questions asked of Andy Kotelnicki and James Franklin specifically about Penn State quarterback Drew Aller. Now, Drew Aller, we talked about it earlier on this week, was named a captain, which that's been a question for a while. Not necessarily, well, who are the captains going to be? Plenty of people have been thinking about that. But the question of whether or not Drew Aller is recognized as a leader on this team. James Franklin said, quote, Drew's done everything right since the season ended. I feel like him and Bo Perbula have taken significant steps, and I think that vote for captain is very telling about how his teammates see him. I think Bo and Drew have really separated themselves, and we're really excited about Ethan Grunkemeyer as well, assumed to be the number 3 quarterback in this situation. Franklin went on to say about Drew Aller's growth, quote, he's always been a really good preparation guy. Him and Bo are really good like that. It's not like it's one thing. When you keep punching the clock and doing the right things, you get better. The game starts to slow down for you. He's lost about 10 pounds, so he's moving and running better. Total development in every area. Drew Aller was voted by his peers, the coaches, and the staff as a captain because of how we all see how he handles his business. Total respect as a program. That is a glowing endorsement. You don't get too many of those from James Franklin. I think there's still a lot of people who are wondering to see if Drew Aller is going to really capture the Penn State fan base and galvanize this team. Because last year, yes, it was good. It wasn't necessarily what people were hoping for after Sean Clifford finally departed school. Bo Perbula had those sparks that garnered a lot of emotion from Penn State football fans and a lot of excitement. And then once you got Andy Kotelnicki involved, people were starting to think, well, maybe Andy Kotelnicki's system seems to like to use athletic quarterbacks. Maybe it's going to be more focused towards Bo. It genuinely sounds like this is Drew's show. And I don't think that was ever really in question inside of the program for that matter. Outside of the program, there may have been that conversation, but inside of the program, it seems to be that's been the way it's been the entire time. Andy Kotelnicki commented on Drew Aller and said before he came to Penn State, quote, I didn't know a ton about him, probably like a lot of coaches. I was pretty immersed in the program I was working at, and whatever you see on TV, when the opportunity arose, you could see the potential when you watch his film, his wittiness, his decision-making. Those kinds of things are very hard to coach and very, very evident when you watch him. His want to get better and growth, it's second to none that I've worked with. Kotelnicki was asked how difficult it is to find those traits in a quarterback, and he said, quote, it's super hard. That's why NFL quarterbacks get paid like $1 bazillion. Kotelnicki went on to say, sometimes people spend a lot of money, even if they haven't been proven that way, looking at quarterbacks. He said, quote, it's rare to find. It's hard to evaluate. Those characteristics that he has, it's exciting. Again, there's not much more that coaches can say to endorse a quarterback in that respect. I think the really encouraging thing is last year, especially looking at this West Virginia game, trying to focus in on the season. Drew Aller's first game as a starter, he was outstanding against the West Virginia Mountaineers. Now, that's a team that got better as the season went on. Good offensive line play, ran the football well. Quarterback Garrett Green is exceptional. I think he's going to create some problems for Penn State's defense. I don't necessarily think that there's enough on this offense for West Virginia that it is going to completely throw Penn State's defense off. But still, there will be a challenge to be dealt with there in Garrett Green. In regard to Drew Aller, the preparation's been done. You hear about the ways that he's changed his body to try and get ready for an offense that is much more focused on running the football. Now, we're all speculating this entire offseason what exactly that means for Drew Aller. I have been very outspoken dating back to last season when Drew Aller got injured against Rutgers that I don't want to see this quarterback running 5, 10, 15 times a game. I don't think he's going to be asked to do that, but it's certainly not his style. Now, altering his body to adjust for these things, he is nimble, he is fleet of foot. He's not going to win a 40-yard dash necessarily against a lot of these Big Ten defensive players necessarily. So again, I'm very curious to see the means by which Andy Kotelnicki uses him. Is it conventional option? Is it your conventional RPO game? Is it more of the play action style? How much is he under center? How much is he in the gun, the pistol, etc.? All these questions have been out there for quite some time about Andy Kotelnicki at Penn State. His track record has spoken for itself in terms of his adaptability when it comes to rosters, and that he will take what is given to him and ultimately try to make the best out of that situation, accentuating strengths and protecting weaknesses. So Andy Kotelnicki strikes me as a guy who really has gotten the favor of the team very quickly, or at least gotten the players to buy into him very quickly. It sounds like Andy Kotelnicki is certainly somebody who is likable altogether and is fitting in well into the program. Now, how is this going to look on the field? Again, I caution people, I don't think this is going to look exactly like it looked for Kansas last year and the year before that. I think you're going to have to go back to his tape at Buffalo when he had a two-headed monster at running back, and that was the way that he really tried to attack defenses, because that's what he has at his disposal this year. Now, in regard to running back, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, we all know the story there. Some bumps and bruises regarding Cam Wallace and Quentin Martin Jr. There's been a lot of discussion about Corey Smith, freshman speedster. There's a guy who was said by James Franklin earlier on this week that Corey Smith is going to see the field this year. The understanding is probably the third running back will be Cam Wallace, and it's, again, who's available, that sort of thing. The upped physicality in camp has resulted in the proverbial bumps and bruises, as James Franklin likes to say all the time. So I am very interested to see who is available for Penn State, maybe not necessarily on the opening drive, but as the game continues, how many guys are hurt versus injured, how many guys play sparingly against West Virginia, if at all, and then slowly get back into the mix as the season progresses. And you do have Kent State and Bowling Green in September to get yourself primed for the rest of the season. And once Big Ten play opens up against Illinois. So that is interesting to me, because if you're talking about 4 to 5 running backs all together, it just creates so many options for Andy Kotelnicki. It creates a lot of depth, and it creates a lot of different looks for the defense to have to contend with. Nick Singleton is not the same as Katron Allen, Quentin Martin Jr., and Cam Wallace, and Corey Smith, all relatively unknowns to this West Virginia defensive staff. Even if you're going to look at their high school tape or something like that, you're still going into this being like, well, we got to prepare and see what they have out there. So that is something Penn State is going to have to their advantage. But again, it depends on the overall availability of that running back room. I am fascinated to see how many bodies we see rotate in at offensive line. Again, is it going to be really digging deep into the depth chart against West Virginia? I could see a situation where no, not necessarily. If there is a core 5 they feel strongly about and the game is very competitive, you might not necessarily see a lot of situations where you are rotating guys in, but it depends. It depends on situational football. It depends on situations that Andy Kotelnicki thinks his personnel on the offensive line can really capitalize and take advantage of this defense. If things are in hand for Penn State, do you start rolling out more offensive linemen to give them a look, to get that experience out there against a credible Big 12 opponent? So I'm going to be paying very close attention to that. I think the one thing we're all really, really going to be paying attention to, despite the discussion about the emphasis on the running game for this offense, is how do the wide receivers fare? James Franklin said earlier on this week, and was asked about his confidence in regards to Trey Wallace being his number 1 wide receiver. That was the question that was posed to him. Franklin responded as such, quote, I think Trey and Liam have had really, really good camps. I think there's a lot of excitement within our program. I think they've earned a lot of respect. They've really worked their tails off since the end of last season, mentally, physically, and have been very consistent. They've always shown flashes at times, but this camp, they've been really, really consistent. We have a ton of confidence in them. I think they're going to have big years for us. There's other guys as well that have had good camps, but those two guys have been very consistent in terms of making plays, their assignments, their responsibilities. He went on to say, quote, I think Omari Evans and Julian Fleming have been good as well, but those two, Trey and Liam, have really done a nice job. Now, I mentioned Julian Fleming. Andy Kotelnicki commenting on Fleming, saying simply, quote, he's looked really good, especially this back of fall camp. His consistency has really risen. It continues to raise this question. What are we going to get from the wide receivers? And also, what are we going to get from Julian Fleming? Now, I was very excited when Julian Fleming entered the transfer portal and Penn State was able to pick him up, because it seemed like a situation where Penn State certainly needed to go get somebody at wide receiver. You had a lot of departures altogether. And then once Keandre Lambert-Smith left in the spring, you were grateful that he was there, at least to add some depth. But there were a lot of comments when he first came to campus about natural leader, fit into the wide receiver room, was doing all the right things, saying all the right things, working hard, all those intangibles. That is just that's great. That's fantastic. We've just yet to hear Julian Fleming's really flashing. We've heard that word flash about Wallace. We've heard it about Clifford. We've heard it about Tyseer Denmark, but not about Julian Fleming, the guy who spent 4 years at Ohio State, the guy who was a 5-star recruit 6 years ago. So I'm still waiting for the answer to this of what is Julian Fleming at Penn State? Is this coaching staff keeping the cards close to their vest because they know they've got something special in him? Or has he underwhelmed? Remains to be seen. I am very, very interested to see how Penn State does throwing the football. I think there's a ton of confidence in this team to be able to run the football. And especially against West Virginia last year, transfer heavy in the secondary. And it was the first game of the year. So you could understand those situations where it was like, are we on the same page? That sort of stuff. Enough time has gone by that those players have had a chance to settle in. So is it a better unit altogether? Drew Auer certainly had a field day last year against this West Virginia secondary. Is it a different story this year? And not necessarily looking at it like it's the end of the world if it's not a stellar day throwing the football for Penn State in Morgantown. If it is a day where Penn State lives and breathes by running the football and gets the job done, there's no problem with that. It's the 1-0 mentality James Franklin likes to talk about. I know that can drive some fans nuts, but coming out of the gate at this point in the season, the way that James Franklin was talking about, you just got to play somebody. You got to get going. There will be those points where this team in every phase is getting into playing condition. So it's not expecting this to be perfect on August 31st, but at least seeing what the potential is altogether. And I come back to the wide receiver room. There's a number of people that we've discussed could be involved in the passing game. Caden Saunders, a guy who's been discussed as well. Don't want to pass his name over necessarily. Somebody who's certainly going to contribute on special teams as a return guy, kind of a carryover from last season, but it sounds like he's established himself during the offseason for that role. How much of Omari Evans do you see, who has had those proverbial flashes in these different points, just few and far between? The Michigan State game last year was one of them. Blue-white games, yeah, but like, is that going to build? I want to see what Liam Clifford is to this offense. How does he fit in at wide receiver? Is Trey Wallace the guy who is taking the roof off of the defense, or is he trying to win in space with bubble screens and slants, something like that? How does Julian Fleming fit in? What's his role within this offense? And on top of that, the tight ends altogether. I think it's really been glossed over because Penn State fans so much have been focusing on the wide receivers are not as good as they could be. The wide receivers. I get that. There's so much depth at tight end for Andy Kotelnicki and James Franklin to utilize. I want to see if those mismatches pay dividends against West Virginia in week 1. A lot of little elements that I'm excited to see. I've talked a lot about the offense here. One thing specifically I want to focus on defense. There's been a lot of conversation recently about Dennis Sutton. There was a quote I think I saw earlier on this week from linebacker Tony Rojas, who's anticipated to be one of the top 2 linebackers, a starting linebacker for Penn State. And Tony Rojas talking about Dennis Sutton, saying that Anthony Donko, one of Penn State's offensive tackles, just saying that he's a pain to block. And Dennis Sutton has been extremely outspoken on social media recently and over the last few years that he believes and thinks he will be the best defensive end in college football. It's lofty expectation. The class of defensive ends on the field this year and anticipated to go in the 2025 NFL draft is quite good. And mind you, on the opposite side of Dennis Sutton is the guy who's getting just a lot more fanfare and buzz because of how his freshman season went, and he's built on it, is Abdul Carter. And you do have to realize in all this, Dennis Sutton's played a lot more DN than Abdul Carter has. So Abdul Carter, while he's been discussed as a menace in camp, part of you hears that and you're like, God, I hope the tackles are okay for Penn State. And then on the other side is like, well, is this going to translate once you're playing a Big 12 opponent altogether? There have been a lot of West Virginia media outlets out there saying that inexperience for Abdul Carter and his issues against the run as a linebacker are going to be a point of weakness for this Penn State defense. So I want to see how that goes. I think playing the run at linebacker versus defensive line, 2 completely different animals. So I'm excited to see how Abdul fares in his first official game as a Nittany Lion at defensive end. Dennis Sutton just creates such a different problem from Abdul Carter, 2 very, very different athletes. Do they stay on the same side? Are they rotating? Are they rotating inside? That's the other element of this. At defensive tackle, I've mentioned it before, there's experience. It feels good that there's some depth, but there's a lot to be proven. Devon J. Thomas, Keziah Izzard, Hakeem Beamon, and Zane Durant, the big 4 that you have to think about. And Alonzo Ford is somebody that's gotten a lot of praise from this coaching staff. And we've heard a lot of little rumors and blurbs about over the last few weeks of he's really shined and he's been, quote, a pleasant surprise, according to a lot of the coaches. This is a guy who was a transfer from Old Dominion that very few Penn State fans thought much of, just a big body potentially and has ability. You just got to see where it takes him. The fact that you have maybe 5 guys at defensive tackle that you can get in there is great. Again, depth is always king in college football, especially in the Big Ten as you progress into October and November and those quote unquote bumps and bruises crop up. I want to see who breaks out and really establishes himself as the D tackle. The 2 guys who establish themselves as the 2 D tackles altogether. What does the middle of that defensive line look like for Penn State? There's been discussion about how Tony Rojas is going to have an added role and responsibility now that he's stepping up into a starting linebacker position. Conversation about Dakari Nelson moving from safety to linebacker to try and aid that depth at linebacker, considering how good the safety room is. Glowing comments by Anthony Poindexter of KJ Winston. This cornerback room, I think, is really, really going to be interesting to watch. Again, more man defense from Terry Smith and company. It's not going to be the same as last year in that I've said it before. There's that top end ability we saw last year from Kalen King, Johnny Dixon, and Daquan Hardy, and a bit of a drop off after that in terms of on-field production. Nothing against those guys because a lot of those guys are going to be playing this year. But the way that sounds like they progress through the offseason, you have 6 corners that can contribute come the West Virginia game. So how many looks are they able to throw at Garrett Green and company once we get to Morgantown? Very, very excited to get some freaking football back in our lives. So I wanted to get this episode out today as week 0 is getting underway. The Florida State Georgia Tech game is going down in Dublin, Ireland. Such a cool way to kick off the season. And then Penn State versus West Virginia, really setting the table for week 1, big noon kickoff a week from today, Saturday, August 31st. Penn State visiting Morgantown, West Virginia on the road, hostile territory, a West Virginia team that got embarrassed, some have said, last year. Penn State, I think, was clearly the better football team last year. I think going into this game, clearly the better football team. However, you can't discount going on the road into that hostile environment and a team that has something to prove and has a chip on their shoulder and does have talent and does have ability altogether. So this is going to be an interesting test for Penn State to start the season. There's been a lot of conversation about the spread. It went from about 12.5. I believe it was at 8. I've seen it at 7.5. Anything can happen, but I still feel very strongly that Penn State is going to be able to come out of West Virginia with a victory to start the season. As I mentioned, Justin King and I are going to have a full game preview of Penn State at West Virginia this Wednesday here on State of State. Like, comment, subscribe, rate us, turn on notifications, get at us on social media at State of State Pod, comment here on YouTube. We appreciate it so much. And if you're here on YouTube, you can become a member of our YouTube channel for just 99 cents a month and get all upcoming episodes of State of State ad-free. Enjoy week 0. We're 1 week away from the start of Penn State football season. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, let us know what you think of the show on social media and check out all of our content on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Search for the handle at State of State Pod. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.